Hi everyone, it's me, your boy, Uncle Melty, the host of the Metal Meltdown. What's good? What's cracking? What's going on? Shut up. My turn to talk. Not yours. My channel. Not yours. Thank you for being here. You look great. Listen, I want to talk about Geoff Tate. I want to talk about his brand new album, Operation Mindcrime 3, and his seemingly never-ending quest to profit off of his own nostalgia and milk his legacy dry. Now, Geoff Tate, for those of you who maybe don't know, is the former lead singer for American heavy metal crew Queensryche. They rose to prominence in the mid to late 1980s and became pioneers of what we now understand and recognize as progressive metal. But out of all of the bands to emerge out of this initial wave of progressive metal in the 80s, Queensryche is almost inarguably, undeniably the most successful. The Queensryche self-titled EP, The Warning, Rage for Order are all certified gold. Empire was certified triple platinum and debuted at number 7 on the US Billboard charts. And then, of course, there's Operation Mindcrime, the band's third full-length studio album. It debuted at number 50 on the US Billboard chart. It was also certified platinum. It is also pretty much universally recognized as the band's magnum opus. It is a concept album, nay, a full-blown rock opera telling the story of Nicky, a drug addict who becomes disillusioned with society and finds himself reluctantly joining a revolution. It spawned two of the band's biggest and most iconic hit songs, Eyes of a Stranger and I Don't Believe in Love, the latter of which earned Queensryche their first Grammy Award nomination. The likes of Loudwire, Kerrang, and Rolling Stone all named Operation Mindcrime one of the best, one of the greatest heavy metal albums ever released in various listings over the years. In 2016, Classic Rock magazine named Operation Mindcrime one of the most essential progressive metal albums. In 2011, LA Weekly named it one of the best hair metal albums ever made. Not sure it qualifies as hair metal, but fuck it, we're moving on, because that's not what we're here to talk about. And one Bernard Doe of Metal Forces once wrote that Operation Mindcrime deserves to stand alongside the likes of The Who's Quadrophenia and Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon for its conceptual brilliance. Long story short, everyone loves Operation Mindcrime, and being a member of Queensryche in the mid to late 80s, even going into the early to mid 90s, is a pretty sweet gig. But things really start to change around 1997. Starting in 1997 with the release of their sixth full-length studio album, Here Is the New Frontier, Queensryche would experiment with grunge and alternative rock and metal and adult contemporary sounds and vibes, and Geoff Tate would even find himself playing moody, sensual saxophone in certain parts here and there, and the reaction from fans and critics alike to this new sound and phase and era of Queensryche was mixed, lukewarm at best, shall we say? They were heavily criticized for transitioning into a more soft kind of mainstream sound. They were accused many a time of selling out. They continued to experiment heavily with alternative rock and even pop rock song structures into the 2000s and even into the early 2010s. And simultaneously, and not so coincidentally, Geoff Tate found himself taking more and more control over the creative direction of the band, over the management of the band, and not just Geoff, but also kind of his whole family. For a time, Geoff's wife, Susan, was the band's manager, and their stepdaughter, Miranda, was running the official fan club. And as more time went on, the other members in Queensryche found themselves being more and more limited as to what they can actually do and contribute to a Queensryche album. At one point, things were so bad that these guys found themselves being pretty much completely shut out of the recording process for Operation Mindcrime 2 in 2005. As the album's producer Jason Slater elaborates in a sworn declaration, the album received very limited contributions from the band members aside from Tate and Mike Stone. Much of the music was recorded by studio musicians due to conflicts between Tate and his bandmates. Drummer Scott Rockenfeld did not play on the album at all. As well, most of the guitars, including Michael Wilton's tracks, were re-recorded by engineer session musician Mitchell J. Doran. Some of the bass tracks used are demo recordings played by Slater, while the drum track to I'm American is a MIDI recording made by Doran that was not originally intended for use on the final album. That's actually genuinely so fucked up. Eventually, Queensryche fired Geoff and his entire family from everything Queensryche related, and after a long and somewhat confusing kind of legal process and case, a settlement was reached where everyone else in Queensryche were able to retain the Queensryche name and branding and continue as Queensryche with new singer Todd Latour, while Geoff Tate retained the exclusive rights to playing Operation Mindcrime 1 and 2 in their entirety for special live performances. I'm not entirely sure how Geoff Tate and his legal team go about enforcing such a thing. Like, genuine question, if I start like a tribute band or a cover band and I decide specifically to do a show where I play Operation Mindcrime in its entirety, can I expect to get some kind of cease and desist from Geoff Tate and his lawyers? Like, genuinely? How does this work? I want to know. Somewhat ironically, though, both Queensryche and Geoff Tate came to the same conclusion and learned the same lesson in the midst of this entire ordeal. Nostalgia sells. The legacy is where the money is at, because warts and all, despite everything that happened behind the scenes, Operation Mindcrime 2 was the band's most commercially successful album since Promised Land back in 1994. And when Queensryche first started severing ties with Mr. Tate and his family, they began playing under the name Rising West for a while, and they played material pretty much exclusively from the first 4 albums plus the debut EP. And all of those shows sold the fuck out. And while all this legal dust was being kicked up, Queensryche found themselves releasing a self-titled album, which saw them return to a more traditional kind of progressive metal sound that fans had been craving for many years, and it was a hit, as too was Condition Human, released in 2015 after the legal dust had finally really settled. Now, Geoff Tate was definitely paying attention to this, because in this same time, he also released an album under the name Queensryche entitled Frequency Unknown, and it sucked hot ass. I mean, parts of it kind of delivered on what fans wanted, but it was also, for the most part, kind of a gritty hard rock heavy metal record with really bad production. Like, that shit back in the day sounded cheap and sloppy as fuck. Marginally better than Geoff Tate's solo album, Kings and Thieves, which was somewhat unfortunately my introduction to Geoff Tate, but nevertheless, still not great. But I have to assume that Frequency Unknown did just okay-ish enough because it warranted Geoff Tate fully returning to a more appropriately Queensrychean prog metal sound and rebranding the entire project Operation Mindcrime. Now, was Operation Mindcrime the band any good? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I've never heard these albums, and to be blunt, I don't know anyone who has heard them either, so no comment. What I can tell you is that Operation Mindcrime released 3 albums from 2014 to 2017, all part of a massive concept album trilogy, and that literally so many people came and went. Like, this band was only active for a few years, and just from looking at, like, the Wikipedia band member timeline, you would assume they'd been around for, like, 30 or 40. And I can also tell you that, like, honestly, nothing about Operation Mindcrime is appealing to me, because everything about this, like releasing Operation Mindcrime 2 and like losing the lawsuit with Queensryche and rebranding yourself as Operation Mindcrime, returning to a prog metal sound that like harkens to that album and that era of your band, the entire thing just screams, hey, look at me, I'm done experimenting, I'm sorry, here's the thing you want and love, please pay attention to me. It all just kind of feels like Geoff Tate trying to live in the past, trying to recapture the magic and glory of the album Operation Mindcrime. And that now brings us to Operation Mindcrime 3, a very soulless and obvious attempt to cash in on the legacy of that album. Like, genuinely, who was asking for an Operation Mindcrime 3 in 2026, aside from the most die-hard Geoff Tate defenders and Geoff Tate himself? Who? Genuinely. Like, it's just such an unnecessary thing to make, in my opinion. It demonstrates, again, like, Geoff Tate just is solely all about cashing in on the legacy of this one particular album, and honestly, it adds absolutely nothing really to the original story. It is as important to the world of Operation Mindcrime as The Lion King 1.5 was to The Lion King. I mean, I'm sure somebody out there might find it mildly interesting to learn about the origins of Dr. X, the antagonist from the original Operation Mindcrime, but personally, I don't. That story is not nearly as interesting to me as the actual story from the original Operation Mindcrime, and I don't really feel like the story is made that much better by just exploring how Dr. X became a villain. But even if there was a great story here, one that I felt needed to be told and shared specifically by Geoff Tate, I still wouldn't really love this album because musically it's just not very dynamic or engaging or memorable. It plays things so incredibly safe. It captures the basic feel of an older Queensryche album, of something within the Operation Mindcrime universe, I guess, but it never really captures the heart. This is kind of the same problem Operation Mindcrime 2 had, but even this album had a lot more kind of going on. Even that album had a somewhat interesting kind of story to explore and share, and offered some interesting tidbits. This has nothing going for it, and it sounds kind of cheap, and it just feels really flat, and if we're being honest here, Geoff doesn't sound awesome. He doesn't sound horrible, but he doesn't sound awesome. Geoff Tate's voice has been in questionable shape for a little while now, so this isn't shocking. I mean, we're not reaching like modern-day Vince Neil, Axl Rose, Danzig levels of bad, but it's not great. He gives the kind of vocal performance you would expect unironically of a Queensryche cover band, like a pretty amateur one that you would see perhaps playing in some crappy rock bar somewhere out there. Like, for all my Toronto folks out there, this kind of feels like something that, like, if a Queensryche cover band played at the Rock Pile, that's what Geoff Tate now kind of sounds like. I don't know if I can say this without being mean, so I'm just gonna say it. He kind of sounds like an aging Bruce Dickinson, but like if he had the vocal cadence and warble of a younger RFK Jr. There are a few little musical nuggets here and there that aren't so bad. Like, there's a decently tight, kind of thrashy, groovy riff and breakdown in the latter half of I'll Eat Your Heart Out, some decently soulful guitar noodling in Do You Still Believe as well. And, you know, stuff like The Devil's Breath and The Answer does feel enough like just old school Operation Mindcrime, Queensryche prog metal that, you know, truly die-hard fans and defenders of that album and of Geoff Tate will probably get a real kick out of them. But the rest of it feels less like Operation Mindcrime 3 and more like Frequency Unknown 2. Just kind of like very thin, very generic, very not great kind of hard rock and heavy metal, and now it's like vaguely progressive because there's a storyline and a few synthesizers and such here and there. Unfortunately, it's now very clear that Geoff Tate has nothing left to offer the rock, metal, and prog worlds aside from derivatives of Operation Mindcrime, aside from projects and albums that leech off of that original album's legacy and importance and cultural relevancy and impact. I do kind of, in a way, understand the logic and thought process behind this album merely existing. Operation Mindcrime is Geoff's baby. Like, that's very much his thing at this point. And Operation Mindcrime 2 was, warts and all, despite the drama, kind of a commercial hit. And the lesson that he learned from that, and also from splitting with Queensryche and seeing Queensryche return to an older prog metal sound to great acclaim and success, is that, you know, people want more Operation Mindcrime. And simultaneous to that, legally, this is all he kinda has left of Queensryche now. This is the one thing about Queensryche that is uniquely and solely still his. So, like, I do get why you're milking the legacy of this album so constantly, but it still just sucks that we're here. And again, I find myself, even with that in mind, what story is there to tell? Like, who genuinely was really asking for this aside from you, Geoff? I don't know. I just don't get it. This is such a bland and unnecessary album, and it really just feels like Geoff being desperate for some kind of a hit. For Geoff's sake, I do kind of hope that it is a hit in some capacity, but considering the fact that nobody is talking about this, considering the fact I've seen no press for this whatsoever, considering the fact there's no hype, no momentum at all, I really, really highly doubt it will be. I do kind of find myself hoping that for Geoff's sake, it really is a hit, but considering the fact that nobody is really talking about this, considering the fact that there is no hype, no momentum around this at all, I really, really, really highly doubt it will be. I think by now you've realized this isn't really a formal review, it's more of a story time video about everything Geoff Tate and how he's just milking the legacy of this album. But if Operation Mindcrime 3 were to have an actual score, I'd say it's somewhere between a 1.5 out of 5 and a 2 out of 5, an incredibly boring, ultimately forgettable, totally unnecessary album that just really displays and demonstrates how desperate Geoff Tate is to have some kind of a hit. I hope you enjoyed this somewhat more informal kind of review in big quotation marks. If you didn't, well, I don't know, fuck you, I guess. Subscribe, other videos, join us on Discord, and as always, y'all have yourself a fantastic fucking day.